Welcome to the Living Word Podcast. I am your host, Genevieve, and these episodes serve as a reminder to how essential your fullest expression is on this planet during one of the most transformative times in our history. Together, we are going to explore truth through vulnerable conversations about life's deeper meaning, exploring holistic wellness, mindset, spirituality, entrepreneurship, love, and everything in between. Let's dive in, shall we? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Living Word, a place for us to bring more contemplation through stories than anything I've personally experienced before. And the feedback from all of you of just opening our minds and our hearts to new concepts, new ideas is such a beautiful thing. So thank you for everyone who's been joining us on season 1 of this amazing platform that I feel so grateful to be hosting. And today is a very special episode. I am taking all of you on a learning journey with me because Zuisei, who I also known as Vanessa, is someone that I met a couple of years ago. And she is a Zen teacher and the guiding teacher for Ocean Mind Sangha, which is a virtual community of practitioners dedicated to their personal and collective liberation through the study of the Buddhist teachings and the practice of Zen meditation. And I don't know about you, but even when I read that, it makes my heart expand. And that's what I'll never forget is the first time that I met you, Vanessa. I actually was captivated first by your French bulldog, Lucas, because I had my French bulldog at the time. But the first time that I was in your proximity, there was an energy about you that I didn't understand at the time, but I felt it. It was this calming, beautiful acceptance. And I remember saying to my partner, I really need to know her. I want to know her. And what I didn't know at the time that I know now is that you spent 14 years as a monk and over 2 decades immersed in Zen training. And so thank you for being here today for us to really learn more about this beautiful practice and teaching. And I would love for you to introduce yourself and share a little bit more about this amazing experience that continues in your life, but that you had. I've never spoken to a monk before.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jen, first of all, for having me. What a pleasure to be able to speak to what I do, which has been a gift that, I don't know if I will ever be able to repay completely. The opportunity that I've had to study with the people that I've had the opportunity to study, to live in the place that I live, to learn what I have learned, particularly about Buddhism and meditation. I don't know how one gets to be so lucky, so fortunate, and then to be able to make that my work. So that is what I do. I went to the monastery really straight after college. I was searching, I was really trying to understand this world and why is it so hard to live? Right? Why is it so painful sometimes? Why is it so conflictive that we have such a hard time living with one another despite our intelligence, despite our creativity, our resilience? And so, I did the usual things. I studied a little bit of psychology. I studied philosophy. I read a lot, generally. And I was really trying to understand why and what do the great traditions, at one point, the spiritual traditions, the religious traditions I became interested in, what do they have to say about what it means to be a human being? And how do we do this better? And so at a certain point, I was in college at the time, I started reading about Buddhism. And then I took time off in between my sophomore and junior years, and I backpacked through Europe because I just needed to be with myself. And it was there during that trip that I found a book on Zen in the bedside drawer in a hostel. And I just read it, sat down, read it cover to cover, put it down, sat down, crossed my legs, and began following my breath. And I thought, this is the entry point. This is what I've been looking for in terms of knowing myself, right, and my mind. And so I began practicing. And then when I got back, I started to become more interested and more immersed. I studied a little bit more formally Buddhism. And when I left college after graduating, I went to the monastery. I had found it in a book on retreat centers before the internet was what it was. And I went and it was one of those things. I got off the bus, I walked through the gate, and I felt I'm home. And I had never felt that. And so, I came and went a couple of times at the beginning, but I really felt like that was the place where I needed to be. And so I moved in eventually. And in total, I stayed there for 23 years, really, until I became a teacher.
Wow. Hearing you say that, like you walked into the doors and you felt home, the only experience that I've had like that is, interestingly enough, when I was at a Dr. Joe Dispenza retreat, and we spent 7 hours in stillness and in silence. And when I went into it, I thought, how the heck do I get out of this? Like I was trying to think of, it was like me trying to get out of it. And at the end of it, that's the only way I can describe it, as I felt like I had found home. And so I understand a little bit what you mean by that. But you've been in a quiet life of the monastery where I'm sure you have learned so much, to vibrant cities, New York City, Playa del Carmen, and Panama. Like all of these different environments, these shifts that you've experienced, how has that influenced your practice and your teaching of Zen?
Yeah, that has been a really incredible journey. When I went to the monastery, once I decided to become a monk, I thought that's where I would be. That's where I was going to live out my days. And that's the vow that you make. And so that was my life. And it was an amazing life with an incredible community of people, incredible teachers that I had. And then circumstances changed, as they do. Life happened. And I finished my training and I left, spent a couple of years in New York City. That's not something I recommend, to go from a Zen monastery to New York City. Was the shock of my life. I had, of course, been to New York City. I had spent some time there, but I had not lived there. And I had certainly not lived there after spending more than 2 decades in a monastery. And so it was very, very difficult in the beginning. But at a certain point, I thought, if I can survive this, I can do anything. And, of course, you learn. I figured out, I started to make a living, doing work that I knew how to do. I do a lot of writing and editing work, and I did know people in the city. And so slowly I began to use, the many tools that I had learned, like resilience, like patience, like being able to stay centered in the face of quite a bit of uncertainty, and to not give up. We're very determined, Zen people. We're very determined and very disciplined. And so I just continued and slowly began to build a life for myself. And I had known for some time that I wanted to teach and I wanted to write. And so I thought, I just need to let people know what I do, right? So I created a website and I just began. I started giving talks and I started writing articles for some of the Buddhist magazines. I started doing editing work for some of the Buddhist publishers. So it was people I knew. And slowly I began to build it. And it was during the pandemic that I began to more formally teach. And so I had to be online. So in that sense, I was very fortunate because I began my work online. And so I didn't have to figure out, how to translate what I was doing. I was doing it and figuring it out as I went along with everybody else who was figuring it out. And so slowly we started to build a community together, some people that I knew in the beginning and then new people. And at a certain point, I realized I was drawing people of a very particular demographic, if you will, people who, for different reasons, were not able or didn't want to do more formal in-person Zen training. One of my students is 86 and pretty much homebound. He's in a wheelchair. 2 others have very young kids, so they can't go off to a monastery for a week. But they were very serious about practice. They were very serious about themselves, about their own liberation, about being free, about not suffering in this life. They really wanted to practice. And so I thought, that's my group. Those are my people. And then I began to tailor the things that we offered, the events that we offered, with that in mind. So we do it very flexibly. And Zoom has really allowed for that. If you go to a Zen monastery, it tends to be very strict. And I think it sounds like you got a taste of that. You're in and you're in. And the events that we do, people can come in and out. They need to take care of their baby. They need to go work and then come back to our silent retreat. And so I've really geared it in such a way that people living at home, we call them lay practitioners, home dwellers, can really do that at their own pace, with their own rhythm. And it has given me the flexibility that I didn't have all the many years I was at the monastery. So I can dedicate more time to writing, and I could move from New York to Playa to Panama now.
Oh, I thank you for that. And that's why I brought it up first, because so often, we hear from amazing, I don't know if this is the right term, but masters. I look to you and I'm eager to learn. And we hear the story and we hear monastery and monk, and everyone goes, well, of course she figured it out. Of course liberation is on her radar. Look at the style of life she lived. And that's what really drew me to you, is I'm like, no, you've had many circumstances and environments where you've embodied this and continue to embody this. And I think that's what's even allowed me to take a step further in my curiosity, is because I respect the different environments so much that you've embodied this practice in. And so I would love to know, when we've talked before, you say to sit. And I would love to know, and is Zen practice the only Buddhist practice? Is there several different practices? And what does to sit really mean?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So it's a little bit of a slang term. It's not a technical term, but it really refers to meditation. And, generally Buddhist practitioners will use that term to sit, to mean to sit in meditation. And very much in Zen and in my lineage, we used it the same way. And so it really means, when we have the picture of a monk or we have the picture of someone doing meditation, we immediately imagine, they're sitting on a mat, on a cushion, their legs are crossed in half lotus or full lotus, and, their eyes are lowered or they're closed, and they're turning inward, right? They're working with their minds in some way. And so that is formal practice. You can also think of the practice of meditation more broadly as really just being with yourself. Blaise Pascal kind of called it, being in your own chamber, being able to harness the energy, the concentration of the mind in order to turn inward and ask, what's going on here? Why do I do what I do? Why do I suffer? Why do I have joy in life? Where does it come from? And how do I act in such a way that I can, maximize joy, not just for me, but for everyone? Again, how do I live well? And I think Buddhism in general, in all its many forms, because there are a number of schools and a number of lineages within Buddhism, what they have at their core is that question of, how do I live well? It was framed a little differently by the Buddha, who basically said, life is suffering. Life is hard. Why? Because things don't last. Because they're really everything, even the most pleasant experiences, have kind of this thing of unsatisfactoriness in them. Mostly because they change, because we can't hold on to them, because we don't know when they will change. If we will lose them, we will. We don't know when, we don't know how. And so living is a very fragile thing, if you think about it. And Buddhism really says, yes, that's true. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Let's recognize that this is the way of being human. And then what do we do about it? Because what he said is, life is suffering, and the root of that suffering is our desire. It's because we want. We want what we don't have. We have what we don't want, like illness, like death. And what we do want and have, we can't keep. And so he said, that's basically why we suffer. But then he said, but we don't have to, because we can work with that want, and we can work with the fact that things change. And then the way to do that is what he called the Noble Eightfold Path, which then opens up into a framework of, how do I live in the different areas of my life in such a way that it makes sense, right? That I can live with wisdom, that I can live with clarity, with kindness.
Wow. I had not even recognized that, even in the context of meditation, right? We're always, or at least I've always seen and been taught that this is where you are meant to push away the thoughts, push away the feelings, get to nothingness. And hearing you speak just now about, no, this is the time for us to go inward and contemplate is actually really fascinating. Because that's one of the things I'm realizing as we're speaking is that so often, like you said, we're trying to either hold on to something, grasp it, we have this tight hold, or we're trying to push it away. So really, the art of sitting is to just be with it all. Is that correct?
Exactly. So that it is the opposite of pushing away. You want to, in a sense, allow yourself to be an open container to let in everything that is there, all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the sensations, so that you can see them more clearly. And then if you are cultivating concentration, then you practice. You see the thought, you set it aside, and you come back, let's say, to your breath. But you can't do that at the expense of yourself, of your experience. So there are thoughts you shouldn't push away. There are thoughts that you actually need to really look at squarely. And so part of the skill of meditation is learning to recognize, is this my breath or is this a thought? Is this a thought I should pick up, a thought I should put down? And that is something that you begin to learn with practice. And it's also the reason that we work with a teacher so closely, because sometimes it's hard to see yourself clearly. Right. And so in Buddhism in general, and pretty much all the schools of Buddhism, that teacher-student relationship is quite central, so that you have someone guiding you, someone reflecting you back to yourself and saying, no, not this way, this way. This is how people have been doing this for millennia. You can do it. Right. I know this is hard. I know you're doubting yourself, but people have done it before you, which means you can do it because you have everything that they have. Right, so even though it's a very solitary practice in itself, we do it in community a lot because it really helps, right, with anything, like anything else.
Yeah, Hayden and I always talk about that, is that mentorship is one of the most underutilized factors in anything in life. So what you're saying makes perfect sense. And also a confused mind does nothing. So having even you right now reflecting these questions back to me that so often, I don't know, we feel embarrassed or shy to ask them, but really knowledge is such a powerful aspect of anything that we do. And as you're talking about this and sitting with ourselves and knowing when to sit with something or something to release, in one of the talks that I started listening to, you touched on the belief that so many people hold that we're somehow not enough. And when I heard that, it brings up almost emotion, because I see that working with a lot of women around the world, that this, and I'm not saying only women, but for me, that's who I work with a lot, that this concept of we are not enough is something that comes up so much in so many different ways. And my question is, how does the practice of Zen, of sitting, of Buddhism help us really confront and transform that limiting belief?
Well, here's one of, I think, the most amazing things about Buddhism. It begins with the assumption that you are not only enough, you're perfect and complete, exactly as you are. There's nothing you need to prove. There's nothing you need to fix. There's nothing you need to change. You are whole. So perfection comes from the term for wholeness, right? For completeness. And then there's a quote that I really love from a Zen teacher who brought Zen, to the United States in the 50s, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. And he said something like, you're perfect and complete, lacking nothing, and you could use a little work.
I love that too.
So, but the work is really only to figure out, to realize I'm already perfect. Because, as you point out, so many of us do not know that. It does not mean that then some of the atrocities that we see in the world, that then you don't do anything. You cross your arms and don't do anything because it's all perfect. It means perfect as incomplete. Everything is as it is in itself. And now there's quite a bit of work that we need to do, right? To care for ourselves, to care for one another, to care for the planet. I mean, that is what the Buddha saw. We have a very hard time knowing ourselves. So, of course, we have a hard time knowing one another. And then we treat things and the environment as if it was here to serve us, right? As if we were put here to have dominion over it, where it is really a completely interrelated relationship. One of the things that a very well-loved teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, used to say, we're not individual, we inter-are. He was pointing really to the fact that in order for me to be me, I need you. And we need the wave, the ocean wave, and we need the mangrove outside your window, and we need every aspect of the whole universe, really, needs everything else. And when you begin to understand that, not just intellectually, but viscerally, it changes everything. It changes everything about the way you relate to yourself and to other people. And so it's interesting, right, that you would think, well, how is it that in meditation, when I'm not thinking about anything and I'm just being quiet and I'm just following my breath, how is it that I come to see that I am that ray of sunlight and that cloud and that wave rolling by? Because that's what happens when we finally get quiet enough. We start to see things as they are, and we start to see that what is in here is exactly what is out there.
The oneness is something that we contemplate often, yet do we really know how divine that is? And the separation that we're seeing amongst people and societies and cultures. And, we've had a very beautiful environment here in Playa del Carmen where we see people from all over the world, different ages, different demographics, and everyone comes together and are living such a similar life. And that really brought me into a new level of oneness and realizing that all of us are really looking for the same. We're looking for purpose, for fulfillment, for joy. And so hearing you talk about that oneness, it reminds me of how much I've learned being in this multicultural, diverse place. And you doing this work and being such an amazing guide and teacher, do you feel that right now, as a collective in humanity, that we are getting closer to the truth of oneness? Because I know it's very easy to see separation more and more everywhere. What is it that you are seeing or sensing?
Well, I think, that when you look on the surface, our division seems to be taking center stage, right? Because our language and certainly our politics, our beliefs have gotten more and more polarized. But I think, when you talk to people, when you talk to individuals, when you talk to people who are embedded in their communities, they understand, that we need one another to survive. I mean, we saw this during the pandemic, very clearly. And that our divisions won't get us really very far as a species. And so will enough of us see this in time? I mean, I really hope so. I do what I do because I really have faith in human beings. And we also have a long way to go. We really can do pretty horrific things to one another as well. And so I have vowed to make my life what it is and to have it be a life that is trusting, of humans' capacity to evolve and to see more of themselves in the world, because that's, of course, how I want to live. If I didn't believe in our capacity to get past those differences, then, I wouldn't even get out of bed, I think. I really do feel, and it only takes a moment. That's the thing. that's what you start to realize in meditation. Somebody can be completely caught in their minds, in their opinions, in their biases. And then something happens at the right time. They see something in the right way, and a whole new way opens up. I see this all the time. I have such privilege, to work with people closely and see them change over time because of nothing but their own hard work. And so I do think it's always possible. I think we just need more, more of us who are committed to that greater good, are committed to living well, not just for themselves and their little group, but with everyone, because that's what we need.
It is what we need. And hearing you speak, the words unconditional love are coming up. And that's what I see in the work that you're doing. And even speaking with us right now, like unconditional love for the collective, for humanity, regardless of the polarizing events that we're seeing on the surface. And that's something very special. And I agree with you. The more, I always say, self-love. And now I'm realizing that even sitting with ourselves is a form of self-love to the highest degree. And so that really resonates with me. Like, how much more in love can we fall with ourselves in order to see that in the world around us? And there's something fascinating that I would love to share, that you actually wrote a children's book, Weather Any Storm. And that's something Hayden, my partner, he's the oldest of 7 children, and they have each of the sisters, 4 sisters. So he's a very patient man. I'm very lucky, but he's 4 sisters and they each have 3 children each. And at Christmas time, we brought the book down for them and they were reading it. And I was like, wow, these principles are so amazing to bring that contemplation into the young minds earlier and earlier. And even what you're saying about, you have so much hope for humanity. I agree with you. And seeing the way that these young beings, I'm like, was I that aware and smart at this age? I don't know, but I'm just fascinated with these younger generations and what they're bringing to the world. And my question is, what motivated you to write a children's book? And I'm going to pop it in the show notes because I highly recommend, if you have children or children in your life, this is an absolute must to have on the bookshelf. But where did that idea come from?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I worked with kids for many years. Most of the time that I was at the monastery, I ran with a couple of other people, a group called Zen Kids, because like you, I feel, how incredible to be exposed, just to the ability to sit still and quiet for a few minutes at a time, that is not weird, but that is actually an incredible skill to have, an incredible power to have. That I became really interested in finding ways to introduce kids to the teachings of Buddhism in a way that was, fun and lighthearted. So it was, less like Sunday school and more like, we did a lot of art, we did a lot of outdoor activities, but we did introduce them to meditation right from the beginning. So we had kids as young as 3 to about 10 in that first group that would sit completely still for about 5 minutes. And, it's amazing what happens when you just throw in that seed, and let it do what it will. I mean, some of them, I think they became adults and perhaps were not that interested. I have seen some of them at the monastery. They got married, have now their own kids, and they're still, committed practitioners. And so, I always saw my job there as introducing them to a different way of seeing the world that they might receive, in school or perhaps, with their peers, that there was a way to relate to themselves and to the world in a very connected way. And then to let whatever was going to happen. And so once I left the monastery, I was actually approached by one of the Buddhist publishers and asked if I would be interested in doing a book. And so we went back and forth with several ideas, and I ended up with the one that became Weather Any Storm, which was then illustrated by this wonderful British illustrator, Patty, and became the book that you saw.
Beautiful. That the concept of resilience for all ages. And that's what really got me thinking, well, if there are children that can learn about resilience, then we can just assume that at any age we can bring that practice in. And even you talking about, people in their 70s and 80s who are learning to sit. And I think that regardless of what form it takes, like giving people permission to get curious what can be found. The first time that I ever didn't have thoughts running through my head, Vanessa, I was emotional. I would always look at Hayden and I would ask him, what are you thinking? And he would say nothing. And I thought he was lying to me. I was like, there's no way you're thinking of nothing. And when I finally had that moment for myself a few years ago, I realized that when there's peace that can truly be felt, everything, like you said, that miraculous shift you see in people, that happened for me in that way, where everything changed just a degree. And it really changed the entire basics of my life. How can I find more of that feeling? And so I would love to know, for people that are really curious of what it would look like to begin a practice to sit, or what would be your recommendation of the first initial, like what would someone do to learn that? And of course, if they are interested in learning more about what you do, I highly recommend to even just take a look at your incredible website. The amount of resources on there and the podcast talks you've done is quite inspiring. Yet what would be the first step for someone who has never done anything like this before or practiced Buddhism before?
Well, if they wanted to learn like formal meditation, of course, as you said, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a video on my website that gives beginning instruction in meditation, we call it. So they could do that. But, sometimes I encourage people, particularly if they're going through a difficult time in their lives, for example, and maybe they don't have a lot of time for formal meditation. Sometimes I say to them, it's okay, just set aside 5 minutes. 10 minutes and sit out on your porch with your cup of tea. Just look out, at the mountain, or look out over the water if you're fortunate enough to be able to do that. Just spend 5 minutes nowhere near your phone and just let yourself be, and then see what happens. Because I think we have become more and more restless. We have become more and more impatient with anything that might feel like boredom. And we've made it so much easier for ourselves to never be bored, because you can always, with a click of your finger, be entertained. And so in some ways, I think it is getting harder to get quiet. I think it's also why it's even more important that we give ourselves that chance. I mean, I recently wrote an article where I was describing, I was invited to speak to a group of mothers with their kids and to show them meditation. And so I decided I would do what I normally did with the kids, that I would give them a, simplified instruction, and that we would sit together for 3 minutes because they were new. And it was mayhem. I mean, the kids were like running all over the place, climbing over themselves, climbing over their mothers, screaming. And, I didn't have the authority in that group to really kind of be like, a little bit more strict. And so I just sat there, gritting my teeth until the 3 minutes were over. And I thought, okay, thank God it's over. And then a mother came up to me with tears in her eyes. And she's like, that's the most quiet I've had since my son was born. And then I wanted to cry, for her and for all of us. That silence has become such a commodity and such a luxury. That 3 minutes of silence is a revelation. And I thought, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be hours and hours of meditation. You don't have to go to a monastery to do this. It is really deciding that, as you so nicely put it, it's such a loving thing to give that to myself. I always say that meditation is the greatest form of self-care, because it is truly saying, I am so important to me that I am willing to set aside anything else that might be calling for my attention. That post that I need to do, that call that I need to make, that meeting that I need to take, for 3 minutes. I am so important that I'm just going to give that time to me. to do nothing but just be. If I want, I'll just follow my breath or count my breath. If I don't, I'll just sit here. I really will just sit here. And it's incredible what begins to happen when you do that. 3 minutes begin to feel like not enough. So maybe you do 5. Maybe then you look for 10. And then maybe you say to your kids, Mommy needs just 5 minutes because I will be better and you will be better if I'm able to do this. And then they learn, oh, okay, Mommy's just sitting quietly right now. Maybe they ask you, hey, can I do that with you? And then they start to see, oh, this is actually not weird. I mean, maybe they get restless, they get bored and they don't do it, but it becomes normal. We're all just having quiet time now. I mean, it's becoming an endangered resource if you think about it.
Well, and the way you just said that is the most loving self-care. I've never thought of it that way, and I couldn't agree more. Because to drown out, like you said, the noise and the demands and the stressors and the shoulds or coulds or musts and have-tos, it is quite phenomenal what happens. And that's precisely what happened to me is now in the mornings, even when it takes me battling myself to take that 10, 15 minutes, I just know that I cannot show up in the way I want to without it. And I just thank you so much for how you just put that. And one of the quotes I read on your site was, silence is the think tank of the soul. And the way that you just enveloped 3 minutes of our day to be such a luxury. And, we're redefining luxury in this new lifestyle that we're living here, myself and Hayden. And what you just said is something that I am going to take with me and share with the world. And I want to thank you for that so much. Thank you.
Oh, of course. And just to give credit where credit is due, that quote is not mine, is by Gordon Hempton, who's an acoustic ecologist, I believe he calls himself, whose job is basically, he sees himself as a protector of silence. He goes and finds places on earth that are still actually silent. But I think it's true. Without some amount of silence, it becomes very difficult to know what we're even thinking, what we're even feeling. That the spaciousness that comes from silence, at a certain point, you do really recognize as a resource. So again, it doesn't have to be hours and hours. I think it's really just that recognition that no meeting, no job, no phone call is more important than your own sanity, right? Your own clarity, your own well-being. So when people say, I don't have time to meditate, it's a little bit like saying, well, I don't have time to breathe.
Right.
And there was a famous teacher, in fact, Deepa Ma. I mean, her students would say, I'm so busy, I don't have time to meditate. She would say, do you have time to breathe? Like, yes, of course. 3 breaths, full attention, 3 breaths. That's it.
3 breaths into 3 minutes into who knows what will come.
Right.
And that is what I'm going to ask anyone listening to this. What would it look like every day this week to take 3 breaths or 3 minutes and just fall in love with either the peace or, like me, I had to fall in love with the chaos in my own mind, my monkey mind. And through that, really taking ownership for being in the gift of living this life. That's what I see it as now. It is a gift to live this life. And why would I not want to find presence? And Vanessa, is there anything on your heart that you would love to share with everyone before we sign off for today? Because I feel that this has been one of my most favorite conversations yet.
Thank you. Yes, I was thinking that what I would love for people to leave with a sense of joy. I think sometimes we think meditation and we think, oh, that's going to require discipline. It's going to require me, really working hard, with my thoughts. But my own experience and what I see with those with whom I work is that when you take a little bit of time to really give space to all of it, the chaos and the beauty and the tranquility and everything that makes who we are, what very naturally begins to arise is joy. That you could say that at the bottom, in the depths of meditation, there's not emptiness. as like a void. What you find is love, fueled by that joy. And so what a shame it would be, right? To not give ourselves that when it is also completely free. You don't have to go anywhere special to go find it. You don't have to travel far. You can find it right exactly where you're sitting. And then when that begins to really take hold of you in your life, you begin to share it with those around you because you can't help not doing that. You can't help doing it. You can't avoid it. So maybe that's a good place to end. Think of meditation as a joy-making machine. It may not feel like that in the beginning. I acknowledge that because, it can be challenging to be still. But once you get past that and you start to really encounter you and really the whole world by extension, what you will find there is joy.
I'm just breathing that in. And I will say that coming from you, when the first time I was in your proximity, I felt a peaceful, joyous love that I could not describe in words. And that is before I knew anything about you. I can validate that what you just said, that once you harness that, it becomes a gift to the rest of the world is exactly true. Because that's exactly what I felt every time I was around you. And so you are a walking, talking billboard of what you've just shared. And that makes me smile ear to ear. You guys can't see it, but I'm smiling ear to ear because this feels so good, so potent to just allow ourselves the permission to be more love, to be more joy. There is nothing more beautiful.
I'm going to tell my partner you said that, because they'll be like, wait a second, no, she actually can get really cranky.
Human. We are human, right?
That's right.
Vanessa, I'm going to put all of your information in the show notes for people to be able to find you. And I highly suggest on her website, you can find other podcasts that I started diving into that are absolutely phenomenal. You are definitely a gift to the collective with all of your wisdom and stories. And I want to thank you so much for your time with us today.
No, thank you. Thank you for your kindness, Jen. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Living Word podcast today. My hope is that you have something new or a remembrance that you can apply in your life right now. Isn't that the whole point of us learning and growing? To take new understandings and alchemize them through our own human experience? Please like and leave a comment or review if you enjoyed this episode and share it with people in your life who would benefit from hearing it also. Make sure you subscribe to the Living Word podcast on your favorite platform and be the first to know about upcoming episodes. Sending so much love and gratitude to be on this journey together. See you soon.